How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Kuf Samech Ches, Daf 168 of Masechta BavaBasra. Friends? Your friends? Yeah, well, we're gonna... Oh my gosh, I think there's a lot of noise going on outside. Of course, I have my noise-canceling headphones, so I only hear it a little bit. But if I hear it a little bit, that must mean that there's a lot of it. Anyways, okay, we're gonna kind of finish up the current Mishnah, learn another Mishnah, finish up that one, and then start another one. How does that sound? All right, we're gonna start on Daf Kuf Samech Ches Amid Aleph at the two dots, about 6 or 7 or 8 or so lines into the Amud. So we said that. So we talked about getting, writing a get, writing a receipt for the get. So we say that the husband pays the scribal fees. My taima, how come? Because the pasuk says v'chosav v'nasan. The pasuk says that he writes it and he gives it. So if he writes it and he gives it, he also pays for it. Ve'ena delav dinanachi. And nowadays that we don't necessarily do this. I don't exactly know what happens nowadays, but at least in the time of the Gemara, at least. Apparently, it didn't always happen that way. The husband didn't necessarily pay for it. The wife paid for it. So why is the wife paying for it if the husband needs to pay for it? So the rabbi said that the woman should pay for it so that the man will not drag his feet, because unfortunately, as we know, the topic of aguna is a very sensitive one, and it is a horrible, horrible thing when a husband refuses to give his wife a divorce, and therefore anything that we can do to just get this over with, we do. And therefore, if we are kind of adamant that he pay for it, and he says, if that's kind of the sticking point, so, well, okay, it's better that she should just pay for it, and let's get this over with, rather than dragging this risky business out. Okay. Fine. Where are we? So we said that we can write so if Shimon lends Reuven $1,000, okay, so we can write that document to say that Reuven owes Shimon $1,000, even if Shimon isn't there, because it benefits Shimon, okay? And we say that Reuven, the borrower, is the one who's responsible to pay the scribal fees. Pshita, obviously, the borrower, the one who's getting all the benefit here, is going to be responsible to pay for the scribal fees. What we're talking about the Chiddush is even if we're talking about a business investment, right? Of course, we know from BavaBasra, Ezu Neshech, that in Iska, that's a business investment. You have an investor and you have a guy. In Babylon Talmud nomenclature. So the guy is responsible to pay for the scribal fees. Now you might think, well, since this is at the end of the day, it's an investment and there's an upside, a potential upside for the lender, for the person producing the capital, providing the capital. Nonetheless, it is the responsibility of the guy to pay the scribal fees. So we said that if Shimon is selling his house to Reuven, so we can write this document even if Reuven, the buyer, is not there, because ultimately this is a document that is saying that Reuven is the new owner, which is obviously beneficial to him. So we could write it even if Reuven is not there, and Reuven is responsible to pay for, right, the buyer is responsible to pay for the scribal fees. Pshita, once again, that's obvious. He's the one who's getting the upside over here. Lo tzricha b'mocher sadeh u'pnei also. Well, it's even talking about a scenario where Shimon is selling his field because it is a very bad field that Shimon just wants to get rid of as quickly as he can. So maybe in that case, Reuven, the buyer, would not be responsible to pay for the scribal fees. In a certain sense, he's doing a favor over here by buying it. Still, the buyer must always pay for the scribal fees. Ein kosvin shtari erisin v'chulei. Also, when it comes to tnoyim and ksubis, so we say that the groom pays for the scribal fees. Pshita, this is obvious. Lo tzricha. This is talking about Da'afilu tzur b'merabanon tenichale lechamua likaruve. That even a tzur b'merabanon, even if the sorry, I was getting distracted. Why is it obvious? I imagine it's obvious because ultimately it's the guy who's making the kinyan, so to speak, right? It's right, isha niknes. I guess that's why it's obvious. Anyways, but we're saying that even in a scenario where, let's say, the chosin is a big Talmud Chacham, he's a big Torah scholar, and therefore in that case the father-in-law, it's a big covet for the father-in-law to be the father-in-law of this budding Torah scholar. So maybe the father-in-law is the one who should pay for for these documents. We say even so, the groom is still responsible. Fine. So again, even if the groom is a Torah scholar, that his father-in-law would be interested in. Well, the father-in-law kind of benefits by having him as the son-in-law, so maybe the father-in-law should pay. No, the son-in-law pays. Fine. Ein kozvin shtar arisus v'kablonus v'chulei. Okay, so similarly, if you have a person who owns property and then there's somebody who wants to work that property, either by working the field and splitting the yield with the owner, so right, which is sharecropping, that the sharecropper receives right, a half, a third, a quarter, whatever the arrangement is of the field, and or a rental be'etzem, right? That there's a fixed amount there, right? That's being paid, okay? And we're saying that the person who's going to work the land is the one who's responsible to pay for the scribal fees. Pshita, again, this is obvious. He's the one who's benefiting here, right? He's getting property to work. Well, it's talking about a scenario where the field must be left fallow for a certain amount of time, in which case the worker is not getting immediate benefit from the field. Therefore, I might think that it is not the responsibility of the worker to pay for the scribal fees. Nonetheless, it is his responsibility. In Kozvin Shtar Berurin, so we said that to write Shtar Berurin, which we are about to explain what they are, that requires the knowledge of both parties. My Shtar Berurin, in fact, the Gemara, what are these Shtar Berurin? Hachatakimu, here in Bavel they explained Shtari Tainoso. So when two people go to Bezdin, so right, when two litigants go to Bezdin, so Bezdin records all of the arguments, right? This litigant was saying X, Y, and Z, and that litigant was saying A, B, and C. So we write down all of the arguments, and that is a reference for the judges to be able to review when making their judgment. So we write those with the, right, so both litigants need to be there, and both, I believe we said pay for the fees, right? Yeah. Okay. Yirmiyah bar Abba Omer says, Rabbi bar Abba, Zebor lo echad v'zebor lo echad. Azoi. This is the third parak, I believe, of Masechta Sanhedrin, the Masechta that is coming up next. That when they are picking judges, right? Maybe it's a machlokas, I don't remember. But one litigant chooses one judge, another litigant chooses another judge, and then I don't remember if they then jointly choose the third judge or the two judges that were selected choose the third judge. I don't remember, but we'll get there probably in like 2 months. Anyways, so that those documents about who chose which judge, so need both people there, and that they both split the payment on that. Where are we? Okay. All right, where are we? Right, where are we? Who could tell me where we are? No, where are we? And he goes, so my shtar berun, right? Okay, so either it's the documents with the arguments of the litigants, or it is a document with who chose which judge. Which litigant chose which judge. That we write separate documents for each of the litigants. Okay. Lema bekofin amida stom komiflige. Let's say that the machlokes between Tanna Kama and Reb Shimon ben Gamliel is about kofin amida stom. Reb Nil zenene v'zelo chaser. That kofin amida stom. Let's say that's machlokas, because Reb Shimon Gamliel says that you write two documents, right? So according to the Tanakama, you only write one document, and according to Reb Shimon Gamliel, you write two documents. So let's say this has to do with koifin al midas sedom, zenen v'zelochoser. So there's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos that says shali shali v'shalcha shalcha zomida benonis. That one who says that what's mine is mine and what's yours is yours. That is the sort of middle, a middle kind of person. And some say that is midas sedom. That to say what's mine is mine and what's yours is yours is midas sedom. And therefore, the Tanakama who says we write one document, it says we don't. So if one of the litigants says, "Hey, I don't want to be sharing this document. I don't want both of our arguments to be on the same document. I don't trust that guy. I don't like him. I don't want that my arguments should be next to his and making fights and things. I'll have my arguments in my document, and his arguments will be in his document." So according to the Tanakama, we says no. Right? We say no. Right? Shali shali v'shalcha shalcha. That my document is for my arguments and your document is for your documents. No go. We don't do that. That's midas stom. Kofen al midas stom. We force them to not do midas stom kind of things. Whereas Reb Shimon Gamliel says, "Ein kofen al midas stom," that we don't enforce the midas stom avoidance, and therefore, Reb Shimon Gamliel does not have a problem with one litigant with the litigant saying, "Hey, look, let's put my arguments in my document and your arguments in your document." Shali shali v'shalcha shalcha. So again, so says the Gemara. Let's say that the machloikes between the Tanakama and Reb Shimon Gamliel pertains to whether or not we enforce the midas, avoiding midas sodom. The Ma'aser Kofin, the Tanakama says yes, we do enforce this, and therefore we do not allow separate documents. Rather, it's one document for both. Ma'aser and Kofin, and Reb Shimon Gamliel says meh. It's okay. You can have this guy in his document and that guy in that document. Shaliv shecha lo nit tuchuli alma kofin. No, both Tanakam and Shimon Gamliel in principle agree that kofin al midas sedom. That if there is in fact midas sedom, so then we would enforce preventing it. But v'hacha hainu time the Shimon Gamliel. But this is the reason why Reb Shimon Gamliel says that we write two separate documents, is because this is not midas sedom. There is an actual downside over here. There's a zen and a chaser. The Amar Lei, because Reuven says to one of the litigants says to the other lo nichali titaviz chuscho gabiz chusi tidamas alaki arya arva. I really don't want that your arguments should be intertwined with my arguments, and that we have to, I have to read your arguments next to mine, and you're fighting with me, and I don't want any of this. It's like a lion that's crouching, and it's not very pleasant, and therefore having your arguments together in one document with my arguments is very, very negative for me, and that's why I don't want it. So it's not just like what's mine is mine and what's yours and yours, but there's actually a negative aspect to having them mixed together, and therefore that is why Reb Shimon Gamliel says that you can write them in separate documents. But if it was simply like, what's mine is mine, what's yours is yours, Reb Shimon Gamliel would agree that we would enforce preventing midas sedom. Says the Mishnah, Mishapara miktsas chovo vehishlish es shtaro ve'omar lo im lo etein l'cha mikan ve'ad yom ploni tein lo shtaro igia zman ve'lo nasan Reb Yossi omer yitein Reb Yehuda omer lo yitain. Says the Gemara, b'may kamifike Reb Yossi savar asmachta kanya Reb Yehuda savar asmachta lo kanya. Very, very interesting. So if Shimon lends Reuven $1,000, Shimon lends Reuven $1,000. Okay. Reuven pays back Shimon $250. $250. Okay. So Shimon lent Reuven $1,000. Reuven has already paid back Shimon $250. So now what do we do? Because right now, Reuven has already paid back Shimon $250. But Shimon has a document saying that he's owed $1,000. So what do we do to prevent Shimon from going to Bezdin and say, hey, Reuven owes me $1,000? fact of the matter is, he currently only owes him 750, but his document says he's owed 1,000 still. So what do we do? So we're going to see in a Mishnah in a few days that one option is that we can tear up Shimon's document and write a new document. What's the word I'm thinking of? And I don't know, produce maybe. Whatever, write up a new document for 750. And therefore, Memela, all Shimon can do is go to Bezdin and say, hey, Reuven owes me $750, which is correct. Another option is Shimon can write Reuven a receipt and say, okay, Reuven, I've received $250. Here you go. Here's a receipt. And if Shimon tries to claim $1,000 in Bezdin, Reuven will show his receipt and show that in fact, it's only 750 remaining. Those are two options which the Mishnah is not talking about. We'll get to that Mishnah in another 2 Mishnahs from now, I believe. The option discussed in this Mishnah, however, is what they could do is, well, instead of tearing up the shtar and writing a whole new one, instead of writing a receipt, how about this? Let's give the document to Levi. Therefore, Shimon can't come to Bezdin and collect it because he doesn't have it, right? And at the same time, we're not throwing it in the garbage. Well, let's give it to Levi. He's a trusted third party. And they say the following. Reuven says to Levi, look, Levi, you don't need to hold on to the document indefinitely. Rather, if by a certain date, let's just make up a date, by the end of the month, if by the end of the month I don't, settle this loan, if by the end of the month I don't pay the outstanding balance of $750, well then, you're off the hook, Levi. You don't have to deal with our mess. You can give the document back to Shimon, and I understand the implications of that Shimon can squeeze me for $1,000, even though I've already paid it back $250. Okay, so basically, again, Shimon lent Reuven $1,000. Reuven has already paid back Shimon $250. So what do they do in order to, make sure that everyone's going to be fair, nobody's going to rip anybody else off? They take the document, right, Shimon's document, and they give it to Levi. This way, Shimon can't show up in court with the document for $1,000 because he doesn't have it. Levi has it, and Reuven says to Levi, I will sort out the remaining balance by the end of the month, and if I don't, then you're off the hook. You can give the document back to Shimon. And I understand that I'm risking Shimon being dishonest and claiming that I still owe him $1,000, even though it's only $750. Sure enough, comes the end of the month, Reuven does not settle the remaining balance. So the shaila is, does Levi actually give the document back to Shimon? And this gets into the question that we've seen, we probably saw it in Bava Metzia, asmachta kanya or asmachta lo kanya. What's an asmachta? An asmachta is, when Reuven says to Levi, look, Levi, I'm going to get this settled by the end of the month, and if I don't, what do you mean if I don't? Of course I'm going to get it settled. Okay, fine. If I don't, to show that I'm serious, if I don't, give the document back to Shimon, and I understand that it means that Shimon can squeeze me for more than I actually owe. Right? So that's an asmachta, meaning Reuven's only making this very risky proposition because he really assumes that by the end of this month, this loan is going to be settled, which is why he's making that risky proposition of, and if it isn't, well, just, you're off the hook, Levi, give the document back to Shimon, and I know that he could squeeze me for $1,000, even though I really only owe him $750. So that's an asmachta, right? So the question is, asmachta kanya or asmachta lo kanya? Right? When Reuven makes that stipulation, that sort of very risky, arguably illogical or irrational in a certain sense stipulation, because why would Reuven take such a risk of having to overpay like that, risking that? It's because he really assumed that he was going to settle the loan by the end of the month. So that's why he made this extreme proposition. So the question is, comes the end of the month and he doesn't pay it. So is that kona? Does Levi give, right? If we say asmachta kan, you say, look, I understand it's an extreme proposition, but he made the proposition. Levi gives it back. Levi gives it back to Shimon. That is the opinion of Reb Yossi. Rabbi Yehuda, however, says asmachta lo kanya. This extreme proposition was only because he assumed that he was going to settle it by the end of the month. He did not assume that there would be a scenario where it comes the end of the month and there's still an outstanding balance, and therefore the whole premise was kind of based on a faulty premise, and therefore the kinyan is invalid and is irrelevant, and the document is not given back to Levi, to Shimon. Okay, so says the Mishnah, Mishapara mixas chovo. So if Reuven has already paid back $250 of the $1,000 debt, v'hishlish eshtaro, and they say, okay, let's take the document for now away from Shimon and let's give it to Levi as a trusted third party. V'amarlo, and Reuven says to Levi, Im lo etein loch mikan va'ad yom ploni, if I don't settle the remaining balance by a certain date, let's say by the end of the month, tein lo shtaro, you can give the document back to Shimon. Sure enough, he gives man v'lo nasan. The end of the month came and Reuven did not settle the outstanding balance. Rabbi Yossi Omer Yiten. Rabbi Yossi says, well, he said, come the end of the month, give the star back to Shimon, do what he says. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Lo Yiten. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda says, no. Rabbi Yehuda says, no. Levi does not give the document back to Shimon. Says the Gemara, what's the machlokas between Rabbi Yossi who says give it to Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda who says don't give it to Shimon? Rabbi Yossi says asmachta kanyo, because Rabbi Yossi says in asmachta, even this extreme proposition based on the assumption that he would have paid back the outstanding balance by the end of the month. The fact of the matter is, he said that comes the end of the month, if I haven't paid it back, it goes to Shimon, so it goes to Shimon, it's Kohen. Rabbi Yehuda Savar, or as Rabbi Yehuda says asmachta lo kanyo, that sort of the assumption that he was going to settle the remaining balance by the end of the month, the stipulation that it was going to go to Shimon if he doesn't balance, repay the outstanding balance, that whole stipulation was only based on the fact that he assumed that he was going to pay it. Now that he hasn't paid it, it's sort of, the whole thing falls apart and there is no actual kinyan. And we do not give the document back to Shimon. Amar of Nachman, Amar Rabba Baravu, Amar Rav, Alocha, Reb Yossi. So Nachman Rab, the halacha is like Reb Yossi that asmachta kanyo. Kiyasu lekame to Reb Ami. When they came for Reb Ami, Amar he said to them, look, Reb Yochanan has taught us so many times. Halacha Reb Yossi ani ma'aseh. Reb Yochanan has taught us so many times that the halacha is like Reb Yossi that asmachta kanyo. So what can I do? I guess I have to say asmachta kanyo. I can't go against Reb Yochanan. However, in fact, Allah is not like Rabbi Yossi, which is extremely notable, because generally we paskin like Rabbi Yossi, right? Rabbi Yossi nimuka imo. We always paskin like Rabbi Yossi, but nonetheless, we're saying we don't paskin like Rabbi Yossi. Rather, we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda that asmachta lo kanya. It's also sugi that we're going to get to in Sanhedrin, but later on in the Masechta, gambling. Amasachik bekuvia. I think that comes later up. I think comes later on in the Masechta. Gamblers, because gambling is be'etzem an example of asmachta lo kanyo. Anyways, says the Mishnah Mishanimchok shtarchovo, that somebody whose document has gotten erased. Right? Okay. So Shimon has a document that says that Reuven owes him $1,000. But the document gets erased. I don't know, something, ink spills on it, whatever it might be. Mamid Olav Edim, so he gets witnesses who know the contents of the erased document. Uvalifnei Bezdin, and Shimon comes to Bezdin with the witnesses. Ve'osin lo kiyum, and the Makayim the shtar. The Gemara is going to explain what exactly that looks like. Ish ploni ben ploni nimchak shtaro. That Shimon had this document, Shimon ben Yaakov had this document, and the document got erased. Beyond Ploni, and the date that was on the erased document was such and such a date, to Floni Edav, and the witnesses were so and so. Okay, so Be'etzem, Shimon's document gets erased, so if he has witnesses who know the contents of, or familiar with the contents of the document, Shimon can come to Bezdin with those witnesses, and Bezdin will Be'etzem, write down the details of the erased document, the date, who were the witnesses, what was the content of the document, and Bezdin will say, okay, based on the testimony of these witnesses, they will be Mekayim the Shtar. Tana Rabbanan the Rabbi Stot says the Gemara, Ezu Kiyumo. What does it mean that the Mekayim the Shtar? So Be'etzim, Shimon comes to Bezdin with these witnesses, and the witnesses write the following, and the Bezdin writes the following. B'moisav Tlasa Aveina, we were three of us, a Bezdin, Ani Ploni Ufloni Ufloni, Anu Ploni Floni Floni Ufloni, us, so-and-so, so-and-so, and so-and-so. Hotzi Ploni ben Ploni Shtamachuk Lifanenu, and Shimon ben Yaakov brought to us a document that was all blotted out in ink, that was all erased. B'yom Ploni, and the date on, as the witnesses testify, the date on the document was such and such a date. Ufloni Ufloni Edav, and the witnesses on the document were so and so and so and so. And I imagine also that they also have to mention what exactly the content was. In this case, that Reuven owes him $1,000. Ve'im kosuvo huzkaknu leeduson shel edim v'nimtzeis eduson mechuvenes. And if they additionally write on the document that we validated the testimony of I believe the witnesses who are signed on the document. Right, that if they then further said, and we also got the actual witnesses who were signed on the document here to validate their signatures, and I imagine also the content of the document, or at the very least, I guess. Well, I mean, Rashbam only says their signatures. Okay, and we've validated that that these are right. Be'etzim, they were Mekayim the Shtar, right? That they validated the witnesses who were signed on the Shtar. Where are we? So I mean, it sounds like Shimon's coming to Bezdin with witnesses who are able to testify about what was in the document. I mean, these are people who didn't necessarily see the loan, let's say, but I guess they saw the document and they know they know that the date on the document was this, the witnesses were this, the amount of the loan was that. So they could testify about the document themselves enough to be able to recreate the document, but we still don't know that these witnesses who were signed on the document were valid, right? Whenever, even if the document was in tip-top condition, we would still need to validate the signatures, which is what, right? So if the Bezdin says, and we validated the actual signatures of the witnesses themselves, and we successfully validated their signatures, Gove, well then that document can be the Kiyum Ashtar can, based on that, Shimon can now collect $1,000 from Reuven. He can take this document to Bezdin and collect with it. And no more testimony would be required. But if they don't have this additional section that says that they validated the signatures, well, tzarich lavi raya, you would have to, I guess, prove. I imagine you'd probably have to prove the signatures. Okay, fine. Okay. So if Bezdin hasn't managed to kind of like validate the witnesses themselves, then we're going to have to bring other evidence to make sure that Shimon's claim against Reuven is accurate. Okay, fine. Nikra Pasul Niskareya kosher. So if a document has been torn by a human, so I assume that what it's saying is that it's completely pasul. Niskareya, but if it got torn on its own, kosher, then it is kosher. And I imagine that you can do this kind of kiyum ashtar if necessary. Nimchok, if it got erased, only tashdesh or rubbed out, I guess. Imri shumo nikr, kosher. So if you could still see what it says, so I guess if you could still see what it says, then it's kosher. You don't have to do anything about it, I guess. Fine. Heichidami nikra. What does it mean? Right. Heichidami niskareya. What does it mean that it's been torn by a human? So Amar Rav Yehuda nikra kereshel bezdin. That bezdin tore it up. Niskareya. If it got torn on its own, keresh eino shel bezdin. A tear that is not from Bezdin. Eichidami kereshel bezdin. What's a tear of Bezdin? Rav Yehuda says, makom edim, makom azman, makom atarif. That if the part of the witnesses has been torn, and the part of the time has been torn, and the part of the torif, which has other dynamic names like the names of and the amount and things like that. So then if all those things are torn, well then that is possible. Abai Omar Shasi ve'eriv, Abai says that if it's like torn in like a crisscross, like an X, then it is possible. Hanu Aravoy de Asu le Pumpedisa. There were these, I think, Arabs that came to Pumpedisa. That would call Anse Arisa de Inche, and they were stealing, they were forcing people off of their property. They would just kind of come to town, and they would say, "You, get out of this property, it's mine." They would just force people off their property. Also, Marvosayu Lekame de Abaye, so the property owners came to Abaye because they were scared that they were going to be forced off of their property. Amrule, and they said to Abaye, Lechze mar shtarin, why don't you take a look at our documents of ownership of our fields, of our property, and just write us a duplicate. Can you duplicate for us our documents? The misnes chad nikitinon chad biyadon, that if these thieves essentially come and force us off of our field and take away our document of ownership, well, we'll have a duplicate, and at some point in the future, if these bullies sell the field to somebody else, we'll be able to go to that person who's not as threatening and be able to prove that actually, you see, we have papers showing that this is actually our field. Amr Lahu, Abai says to them, I'm really sorry, but my Avid Lahu, what can I do for you? To Amr Rav Safra. Rav Safra says, we're going to get to this tomorrow, I believe, in Kosvin Shnei Shtaris Asada Achas, that we don't write two documents for one field, Dilma Tarif, Vahadai Tarif, because we're concerned that somebody is going to basically double collect. So meaning, that can happen, for example, in a scenario if Shimon sells a field to Ruvain, let's say, and Ruvain has two of these documents to prove that he owns the field, Levi comes and takes the field away from Ruvain, okay, because Levi says that Shimon owes him money, so Levi comes and takes the field away from Ruvain. Now Ruvain has two documents of ownership, so Ruvain can go to Yehuda, right? Because meaning if Shimon had sold two fields subsequently to Yehuda and to Yisachar, so Levi can go to Yehuda and take away the field, and to Yisachar and take away the field if he has two such documents. So therefore, we don't give an owner two documents of ownership. So Avukatarde lay, but these owners, these property owners, were giving Abai a hard time because they were really concerned that these bullies were going to take their fields away from them and they would be stuck. Omele the Safre, so Abai, but Abai says, what can I do? I mean, you can't write two documents for the same field. So Omele the Safre, but these people were bugging him. So Abai says to his scribes, Zil Ksovlehu, Hu ala Mechak Ve'edav ala Niyar. Look, scribes, why don't you go write for them a document? But write the document in such a way that the text of the document is on erased parchment and the signatures are on clean parchment, as we learned the other day, the apostle, that would be apostle. Omelei Rav Acha bar Manyomi l'Abai, Rav Acha bar Manyomi says to Abai, V'dilma Rishuma Nikr. Yeah, but what if we write the document the first time and then erase it, but you could still see the letters underneath? So V'tani Nimchak Nitashdesh Mishuma Nikr, kosher, that if you have a document that's been erased or rubbed out, if you could still see the letters, then it's kosher. So shouldn't we be concerned that this duplicate document, if the Rishumo is Nikr, then they might still be able to kind of collect with it and run into the same issue that we're trying to avoid? So Amalei Sabai says, Mikamina Shtar Ma'ayo, Aleph Beis Ba'al Mikamina. No, I'm not saying actually write a real document and then erase it and then write a real document on top of that. I'm saying write a fake document, just write Aleph Beis, write gibberish on it, erase that, and then write on top of that. So even if there is something that you could still see beneath it, there's nothing meaningful there. Okay, well that was Daf Kuf Samach of Masechta BavaBasra. We basically wrapped up the previous Mishnah, different scenarios about who's responsible for writing and paying for different documents. We talked about when a document has been repaid in part, and that's the concept of asmachta kanya, asmachta lo kanya, machlokas Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda. And then we got to what do you do if a document has been rubbed out? And tomorrow we're going to kind of continue on this. Tomorrow I think is going to be a difficult daf. But that's all right. And peace out.